Welcome to the Unapologetically Jewish podcast. My name is Matt Taub. I want to thank you for joining us today. I have an unbelievable guest today. Today we've got James Lindsay, who's, if you know who James is, he's written books on Marxism. He's got a ton out there. I want to make sure you look him up. So many to list. James has spoken across the globe at least 10 times here in Canada. If you follow him on X, tons of great tweets all throughout the day. You can go down a massive rabbit hole there. Really pushes it on every podcast he's been on. I've listened twice to the James, to the Joe Rogan one, which is amazing. Only because so many rabbit holes there to go down. So James, I want to thank you for coming along and joining me today. And I really just want to jump right into this. James, you've spent years studying ideologies built around oppressor and oppressed. Since October 7th, Jews suddenly seem to have been assigned a very specific role in that framework, and Israel become the oppressor, Palestinians have become the oppressed, and once again, categories were established. Almost anything could be justified now. What did October 7th reveal to you about the ideology that you spent years studying?
I mean, a lot of people ask this, like, was I surprised come, late October 7th, maybe early October 8th? Obviously, the events of October 7th were just unbelievably horrific, right? And, like many people sat there, I guess it would have been late on October 6th, Eastern time when all this started to unfold. It'd probably been very late in the middle of the night when the video started to hit the internet. So I think I was behind the curve. I don't think I saw it till I woke up on October 7th Eastern time. So it had been going on for many hours by that point. But just shock and horror to see what was actually happening and that this was unfolding. But then there's the propaganda, right? The reaction. And I was so not surprised by this that one of the first things that I said is Gaza Floyd, by which I meant that Israel was going to get turned into the police officer Derek Chauvin with his knee on the poor George Gaza laying on the ground, or Gaza Floyd, I guess, laying on the ground. And
Wow.
the whole world was going to erupt, like what do they call it? Tentifada or whatever that did across all these college campuses. 0% surprised, not the slightest amount of surprise, because I'd studied the ideology. I had known its roots. I understood the history actually of the ideology. I'd even written in 2020, kind of presciently in October of 2020. I wrote an essay that I published on my website, newdiscourses.com. I published this essay called, if I remember the title right, Critical Race Theory's Jewish Problem. And I didn't outright predict October 7th, obviously, because I wasn't even paying enough attention to the Gaza so-called Palestine issue to have predicted such a thing. But I mean, I did sort of predict that this was going to erupt, or at least I laid out the entire argument. So it wasn't a surprise at all. This is historic. I mean, we could spend the entire time that we have, however long we have, even if we spent 5 hours today talking about how it was predictable that the left was going to do this, whether that's from kind of like the Soviet creation of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Soviet involvement, all of the leftists like Jean-Paul Sartre and Edward Said and Franz Fanon taking up the Palestinian cause in the post-colonial dimension, all the weird stuff in critical race theory that are asserting the same things that we heard. Like, this was a done deal. My favorite piece that I'll point out is, one I bring up all the time, but it's the most important. Angela Davis, who's one of the most radical woke people in the country. She's like 100 years old now, but she radicalized under Herbert Marcuse. Like, the father of the new left was her PhD advisor. He radicalized her. She joins the Communist Party USA, runs for vice president of the United States as the CPUSA candidate, and actually ends up getting pissed off and leaving the CPUSA for it being too conservative after the fact. And then she says that she radicalized twice. The first time was when she was in her graduate program with Marcuse, and the second time was when she went to train radical tactics in Palestine. So that was back in the 70s, man. And she trained in Cuba. This is like bread and butter leftism. So I knew exactly what they were going to do. The right surprised me maybe 10% because I'd already been watching the anti-Semitism just a little over a month. It was September 2nd. I saw it recently. September 2nd. So just over a month before October 7th, I tweeted out, it's on X, you can go find it. I said something, to quote myself as well as I can remember the exact wording. Our side, meaning the conservative side, the right wing, or whatever you want to call it, the Republican Party, whatever you want in the US, is about to be derailed by a massive anti-Semitism problem. If we don't take that into account and do something about it, it's going to be a huge problem, or something to that effect. So I saw the anti-Semitism problem ready to leap out of the bushes from the right wing as well. So when like kind of Candace Owens, who I'm calling Inspector Ratchet at this point,
Yeah.
kind of picked up the flag and ran with that very quickly in October of 23. Again, I was a little surprised that it caught on with the right wing. I wasn't surprised about the left, but a little surprised with the right, but I knew that the propaganda was coming. I knew that it would come heavily through this radical right that had kind of lost the track and was pushing, I didn't know how much Middle Eastern propaganda they were pushing, but the amount of Russian propaganda they're pushing was huge by
Right.
that point.
So let me ask you, how do you like? We'll talk about the left, the right a lot more, and the left especially a lot more afterwards. But how do you? Because this really fascinates me. Like for you to notice it prior, and I saw a bit of it online as well prior to October 7th with the right. But how did you see it so clearly, and why do you think it took such a hold? Because it's taken a hold, and I hate saying right wing, left wing, and I really do because it is now. It's almost that horseshoe where they're not even right
Yeah.
wing, left wing. It's just they're just millimeters from one another.
Yeah.
But how do you think it started? How do you think it took a hold? And why do you think it has grown so quickly and so intensely?
On the right in particular,
Yeah,
because the left has been doing it for like 30 years. So,
right.
and
The
even
left is
longer.
a given. We've seen the
Yeah.
left go.
Yeah. So, yeah.
The right for a long time for me was kind of like the '90s moms, the '90s Republican moms fighting rap. That was
Right.
the
Right.
right. That was the
Right.
deep right. You know
That's
what I
right.
mean? Like,
That's right. That's right. Okay. So, I had the good fortune. The short answer is I was paying attention, but I didn't mean to pay attention. I didn't even mean to pay attention to the left, right? I mean, I was studying all this leftism, I was studying critical race theory. But what had actually happened is, if you recall, and it's like it's a bit far afield to get into the whole story, but back in 17 and 18, I wrote a bunch of fake academic papers, the so-called grievance studies affair. A bunch of them got peer-reviewed journals to accept them. Blah blah blah. Kind of a initiation into this whole culture war thing. And at the time, there were all these papers that kind of, I was running through, I was reading a lot of academic stuff, trying to find papers that were crazy to cite or to model after or whatever. And there were a bunch that were about like Jewish stuff. And I thought it was like really crazy, some of these things. And I remembered that later, like Jewish as a white identity or something like that. And I was like, huh. So I noticed it with the left and it was similar with the right. I had the good fortune, I suppose, in January of 2021, so it's pretty early on, right? To get
mm,
invited to speak at a conference that was hosted by the Claremont Institute and not from the stage. It wasn't like a Nazi rally or anything crazy. But people in the hallways started coming up to me and they're like, James, you're doing such great work on the critical theorists. You're tying all this stuff to Marx in a way that like really needs to be done. You're like basically, leading the field on it. So helpful. Thank you. Thank you. And then they're like, but some of them, not everybody, some people were like, we got to ask you a question. Have you noticed, and is that word right? Have you noticed what the religions of those people are? All the critical theorists, what religion were they? And I was like, totally naive and stupid. I was like, communist? And they were
yeah,
like, that is their religion. And they were like, no. And the same religion of Karl Marx. I'm like, communist? And they're like, no. And so this was my introduction to the noticers, right? But these were people that were not like, they weren't just random conference goers. This was like a closed door small meeting during like kind of the height of COVID. So it's like, it was like kind of notables only. And I was like, crap, man, there's a lot of people here like suggesting that communism is a Jewish ideology.
mhm,
And which I had already and obviously encountered that idea, and I had rejected it pretty much outright. I mean, Marx writing on the Jewish question in 1843 pretty much kicks that one right out of the door. But
yeah, it does.
nevertheless, and it being like literally anti-God, not such a Jewish value. But anyway, I'm like kind of concerned. So I just kind of kept a distant eye on some of those people and the people who talked about or followed those people to see what they're talking about. And this radical undercurrent of anti Semitism was bubbling up. And then in 22, so over a full year later, I start to notice that this is, you know, gaining momentum. In fact, it's being funded, not necessarily the noticing maybe online, but the people that were associated with this more radical right wing movement that had noticing embedded within it was taking off with money behind it, with organization. Like they are like, I've seen this before from the left, and like, these are organized, activists. Uh oh. And so I even convened a meeting of some Jewish friends that I have that, have some standing in, kind of the commentary space here in the States about how I kept hearing this phrase called J pilling, that people were getting J pilled, which means, waking up to the truth that the Jews control the world.
Yeah.
And so I was like, it's basically the J pill is what's inside the pill if you open it up as the protocols of the elders of Zion. And
Yes.
it's just, Russian propaganda designed to fool illiterate peasants, and it's working on allegedly educated American conservatives. It's amazing. But anyway, this was in like 22. I'm having this meeting like this is an emergency. Like
Mhm.
the right wing is very rapidly, and it's younger, kind of more alt subculture, very rapidly dipping into, Jews control the world for all the bad things that happen, major anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. This is going to become a huge problem in the future because, like, I just track, like, here's something rising up. Is there anything that can stop it? I don't see anything stopping it. I don't. If I talk about it, it goes nowhere. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody believes me. The first time I actually talked about this, I got accused of being anti-Semitic by saying there was rising anti-Semitism on the right that was operating on the noticing clause, and basically got like shunned from polite society for a while in 21. So I thought this is going to metastasize. Like there's nothing
Mhm.
to stop it from metastasizing. It's not like a tumor that's going to grow into like a neat little ball and it's just going to be what it is and we're going to have to excise it or whatever. It's like this is metastatic. This is going to go everywhere. And it's going to blow up at some very inconvenient time. I didn't know what that time was. I didn't tie it at that point to the 24 election, but I saw it coming.
So so you said something great there. The protocols of Elders of Zion, which was meant for the uneducated peasants, and then who's reading it and who's being hooked up to this are that educated or so-called educated right wing educators, thought leaders, and their disciples. Not to pull too much of a conspiracy out of this one, but when you look at what we came out of after COVID, where I really think it became a period of people just becoming stupid for a little bit of time, really sucking in all this. Did that play into a lot of it? Like, because you're looking at
Absolutely.
these people who are, and we look at our education system. We have a whole generation of uneducated people coming out of out of the education system who are not being educated properly, so they're able to eat this up. So do you agree that's part of the problem there as well, where they were just kind of given this and they're hearing it, and then throw in the perfect storm online? I remember I'm old when the 90s hit, late 90s, and the internet came about, and it was like, we have the world at our fingertips and we're going to have everything to make us so smart. And we got stupider.
Yeah, nobody said that we had the third world coming into our living rooms through our devices, posing as our countrymen, which is one of the huge problems. They say import the third world, become the third world, and it's in your phone pretending to be, for you guys, Canadian. I mean, it's also in your living room, basically, for real, in Canada too. But it's literally it's in all of our phones. Like one of my favorite examples to bring up there is that when some during the initial parts of this conflict or war in Iran, one of the internet cables got cut. I don't know who cut it. I don't know what happened. I just know that a big swath of Pakistan went off the internet for like 3 days till they got it fixed. And the Scottish independence movement vanished off of Twitter. And it's like,
Yes.
oh, that's not real.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's like literally the third world, both between intelligence operations and between literal just third worlders that are filled with all kinds of third world beliefs about race and other things are flooding this, and a lot of them are pretending to be Westerners. A lot of them are making money that way. I mean, there's a lot of problems that we aren't like aware of.
Oh, we saw that when Elon opened up X to see where the accounts were started, right?
Right,
That was a
right.
small little tip of
That
just a
and
tip of it.
yeah, and we had like a few days of clarity from that, and now it's murky again. But so the answer to your question is mostly yes, but it's more than just like we have this really bad power dynamics kind of education that everybody's gotten for like 25 years, and we're all kind of dumbed down. COVID did something else, which is that it actually subjected all of us to a giant conspiracy. Like literally there was a conspiracy to lie to the whole friggin' world about what that was about, right? Okay, so and we're now seeing this with Fauci's diary. It's like, holy smokes. And like, we all just got that. And then, kind of the big moment for a lot of people with that was like, okay, BLM riots are not super spreader events because racial justice, which doesn't make any sense at all. And people were like, wait a minute, this is all fake. And it's like this huge shattering of the ability to trust institutions. So what it actually works out to be is that I think the main thing that was the vehicle to carry this into so many people, especially younger people who have grown up on the internet, whose lives at the formative period of their late adolescence or even mid adolescence got shattered by this COVID nonsense
Mm.
that they foisted on us. Or it's not nonsense; it was evil, but it was a conspiracy. Like literally, everybody marching in lockstep to lie, take the sitting president of the United States off Twitter while he's the president, to whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, for the January 6th stuff, this is an insane time, really. So there's this death of the trust of anything institutional. So all of a sudden, you have this opportunity for all of this, what do they call it, Pallywood or whatever, all this kind of like Russian, Iranian, Hamas, etc. Muslim Brotherhood style propaganda just flooding in, and whoever's doing it, domestic actors as well, just flooding this zone with, what the ultimate thing you're not allowed to question is the Holocaust. The ultimate thing you're not allowed to question is, whether or not this relationship with Israel is a good idea, whether Israel's really an ally. If you're a conservative Republican in America, you are not allowed to question Israel. Maybe they're hiding something. They've lied to
Yeah.
us about everything else. So it's that mentality, I think, more than anything else, because anti-Semitism, which is just now recloaked as this anti-Zionist thing, so it's like wearing politically correct clothing for the era, which of course was a Soviet rebrand, by the way. It hasn't gone away in 50 years. This thing is the ultimate conspiracy theory, right? It's like the final boss conspiracy theory, other than flat Earth. It's like those two compete with each other for like the bottom of the bottom of conspiracy theories. You're like, do you think that the bankers sunk the Titanic? Well, that's pretty plausible by comparison to flat Earth and anti-Semitism. And it's like it's like there's this like gravity or something that when you start thinking too conspiratorially, eventually, boom, you're either a flat Earth or an anti-Semite or both. And so that got pushed operationally, not just in the wake of October 7th, very, very, very hard, but in advance of October 7th also. So it wasn't just Gaza Floyd, which really did
Mhm.
move the ball the most downfield on this. It actually, as you would say in information warfare language, the operational preparation of the environment preceded October 7th by, at least on the right wing, in right wing circles, at least a year and a half, maybe 2 years, operationalizing strongly in middle of 22. So a full year and a quarter ahead of October 7th. So I shouldn't have been surprised as much as I was that the right wing kind of gobbled it up, but I wasn't as savvy. It's like you learn a lot of things on the far, like
Yeah.
humanity didn't know that nuclear weapons were a bad idea until we dropped a couple on Japan. And like, whoops,
Yeah.
maybe that's a bit much. Maybe we should not do that again.
You dumb that down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're going to learn that lesson with AI too. It's like we're going to do something like these robot dogs or something, and we're like, oh, those were a mistake. Whoops, massacre, and let's turn that off before we learn our lesson, because you kind of have to, in a sense, touch the stove before you know it's hot.
Yeah. We
So
do. We have to touch the stove. We do.
yeah, and so anyway, this thing though was deployed, in my opinion, as a strategic operational weapon. I think that the environment was prepared operationally in advance of October 7th by people who knew October 7th was coming. I'm sure that some of them knew the date, or some of them didn't, and just knew that it would be sooner than later. Iran would have had a gigantic motivation to do that, because they know, like anybody who can put two and two together realizes October 7th happens, Israel responds, Iran's eventually getting their nuclear facilities bombed out of the ground. Like it, or full blown regime change war or something. Like Iran knew, like the second that they pushed go on that, as that Hamas pushed go, they knew that like it was coming home sooner or later. So they would have had a huge motivation to put out this operational propaganda way ahead of time. And they know the left is like easy. My favorite line, period, is from about the left is Yuri Bezdomov, the Soviet defector, talking
Mhm.
in the 84. And he's like, the real challenge, of course, is to get the conservatives. He said they were trained in KGB school or whatever. Don't waste your time with the left. Those political prostitutes will believe anything. And it's true.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but the right was the harder get. And they were able to do that. And I think the other piece besides COVID was 20 years of, and I would bet you, structured demoralization about the nature of the Iraq war,
Mhm.
somewhat based on points of truth, somewhat based on points of lie, to make it to demoralize our society about fighting wars in the Middle East, or about any military involvement in the Middle East.
Which is funny because I actually know people who did fight in Iraq, and had those conversations. I was like, "We're their WMDs," and I had a friend of mine who was a staff sergeant in the army, and he said, "Yeah, they were there. Were they as big as we thought?" And no, but they had it was kind of like, unless you're there, you didn't know, but it wasn't as bad as we all thought it was.
Like,
But
yeah, most of the Israelis I've talked to about it are like, yeah, they were there, and then in the gap in the amount of time they hid them in Syria.
yeah,
And it's like,
like
I don't know if that's true, but I know they found some suspicious stuff in Syria recently. Plus,
right,
besides that, Saddam actually had chemical weapons and actually used chemical weapons, which still count as WMDs. I get that that's not what the American public thought, that they were being sold that there were nuclear weapons, but
yeah,
Saddam did have a nuclear weapons program. Where it went, how far it went, I don't know. But like every Israeli that's kind of in the know that I've talked to is like, yeah, and they're in Syria right now, like hidden in caves.
yeah. So there is, yeah. So we were again programmed in a certain way. So I want to go back. You talked about critical theory. And we know this. It needs an oppressor and an oppressed. We'll get back to that for a second. Let me ask you. So again, being the unapologetically Jewish podcast, and Jews are now the scapegoat for everything now. Where did Jews fit into that framework from your take on the oppressor and the? I know what we see, but where
About
did Jews fit
Jews?
into this? Yeah, where do they fit
No,
into that?
I mean, it's been pretty patently obvious. So okay, so my long running Gentile goyim or whatever I'm supposed to be this week take on the Jews, leading way back, is I'm basically an American. I grew up in a Catholic household that wasn't very religious. I spent most of my life in a very not religious way in the Southeast. What's the relevance of being in the Southeast? There are 9 Jews here, or maybe 12 now. I don't know. There are like none. I didn't know. There was like the one Jewish kid at school. Later, I get into after college, I make friends with a guy. His name's Ryan. He's Jewish. He would hyphenate it, right?
Yeah,
Right. And it's like, that's my exposure to Jews. So I didn't really have a take on this. I knew there was endless conflict in the Middle East, a lot of it centering on, land claims about, is it Israel's, is it Arab, is it like whatever. And I was like, I don't know. And I kind of was in an atheist mood as I started to get in my 30s. And I was like, it's a religious thing. I don't care. It's a bunch of religious lunatics fighting. I don't have a dog in this race. Then I listened, and this always makes people so mad. It's funny. I actually listened. There was something that happened, and I don't know which event it was. It would have been somewhere in the 2011 to 2014 range, probably before 14. But anyway, I was listening to Sam Harris. He put out like a 10-minute podcast about the moral question of Israel. Now, I'm so aware at this point that I still don't know that Sam Harris is actually Jewish. He's a Jewish
right.
atheist. It's just not on the radar, right? He's a man saying words. I can evaluate the words without taking identity into consideration. But anyway, he makes this argument, and it's a very simple argument, which is one side, if it had the power to obliterate the other, would not. And the other side, if it had the power, would obliterate the other today. And we know that's true because the side that does have the power to do that doesn't do it.
Doesn't
And the
do it.
side
Yeah,
that doesn't have the power to do that tries anyway. It's like a very simple argument. It's in their charters, and it's like Hamas charters, like literally like kill all the Jews. And so they got the whole argument about Islamic waqf for the land, which means it's, permanently Islamic.
Mhm.
Jews can't have sovereignty over it. I know all these different arguments now. I didn't know them then. But Sam, my first make a decision about Israel question was listening to Sam do that podcast with an open mind. And I was like, yeah, Israel's obviously the morally right side of this question. Okay. But it's still this abstract. It's not relevant to me with my like 2 Jewish friends that are Jewish with a
Yeah,
hyphen. They don't talk about Israel. It's not centered to their thinking, or, it's not a topic. And then we go on, I start studying the critical race theory and all this. I'm like, wow, the left really doesn't like Israel. Wow. I'm reading Orientalism. I'm Palestinian this and Palestinian that. I'm like, wow, they really have a problem. They're like, Jews are oppressors. They're colonialists. I'm like, no, they're not. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, they're like, so I didn't mesh with the left, but then the left's posture kind of convinced me that, whatever I picked up from Sam Harris was probably right. Because at that point, I figured the left was basically lying about every issue that it laid hands on.
right.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but it wouldn't have been actually, I realized as the anti-Semitism started to rise from like 20 to 23 that like that's wrong. And so, I kind of took a stake that like I'm going to oppose that. Like that's just wrong on its face. I don't think I could have told you what Zionism means at the time. So like I wasn't there yet. Then, once October 7th hits, it's just like probably by the end of October, I was like, I have to choose. I have to take a side in this. This is like globe
Mhm.
shaping stuff of deep moral implications, and it wasn't hard to pick a side. It was like very clear which side to take. I went to London during their, I think it's to this day the biggest one of their pro-Palestine or whatever protests
Yeah,
they
that
had. It was
massive
the
one.
third week after October 7th, the third Saturday afterwards, and I marched against the crowd. Actually, there's videos of me marching against the crowd. And I went and I was like trying to find out what it is. And I went to all these little booths, and there's like they're all the signs everybody's carrying, all the flags, everybody's the Palestinian flags are being handed, are all paid for by the socialists. I was like, that's wild. Huh. How
Yeah.
weird. There were like calls to prayer everywhere, people praying in like every lawn in front of every business. It was like really strange. But, I was like, okay, this is total BS. And at that point, I was pretty clear. And I mean, I even did interviews at the ARC thing that they did. That's why I was in London at the time. So like 2 days later, I was at ARC, did some interviews, and even talked about this. It's very clear. So I'm on video. It's like I'm with Israel. This Palestine thing is crazy. I did a debate with a communist while I was there for Unheard, and was like, yeah, but the PFLP was a Soviet project. And he's like, yeah, it was. And like, he didn't even try to argue it. I was like, so this is all like bogus. This Palestinian cause is bogus. And then ever since, I've just learned more about it. I finally went in 25 to Israel. I've been twice now. And I was like, oh, wait, like once you see it with your own eyes, you're like, oh my God, this is really obviously like, it was so disorienting to watch the propaganda on my X feed while I'm riding in like a car in Israel looking around. Like it did like two worlds at one time. It's like, this is aliens in my phone. I don't know what these people are
Yeah, the
talking
stuff I was
about.
on social, you don't know what you're seeing. And I read that you also went to like the kibbutz with the Niroz, which is also that I was there in December, and it changed me. Like not
Yeah.
everything changed me after October 7th, but that
Nero's
really,
was tough.
yeah,
Yeah.
that took a toll.
I also went to Barry before it got kind of rebuilt. And that was a rough ride. I went to Nova twice.
Yeah,
So I went once, and then I went back because I wanted to go with Rob McCoy and Seth Dillon and kind of see all of it again and take it in a second time a few months later after I'd had time to process the first trip. And I didn't realize that it would be harder the second time. It's like the shock made it actually easier.
yeah.
And then the second time, you're just kind of like, you're left with like this full weight of the processing you've already done on all this. And you're like, oh, that's even with stuff like massively repaired. Like it's not like
Yeah.
it was visible just from October to January, 3 months. I was like, wow, they fixed a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so I was there 2 years later, and I had 2 years to process all that. I went to Niroz, and, the yellow flags in front of houses where people in front of the kibbutz where they were kidnapped from, they didn't talk about I didn't know about the black flags where people had been murdered in the homes. So I turned one corner, and I just saw black like, what seemed to me in the moment, it wasn't, but seemed to me like hundreds of black flags. Like, that's
Mm,
what it felt like, and I'm like,
yeah.
I was not prepared for
Mm-mm.
that.
Yeah.
That through
No.
like, despite all that we saw, and it was 2 years later, all that we saw was just mind blowing. So you're in Israel, you see all that, and then you start questioning all. And you brought up, you didn't know what Zionism really was. I'll tell you, when I was a kid, and I've talked about this before. Remember, I was in grade school, maybe early junior high. Somebody had said to me, "Are you a Zionist?" At a time where it wasn't really a conversation, and I responded in my very naive way. I grew up a traditional Jew. We did the holidays, the mainstay holidays, and went to synagogue 3 times a year. That was it. And I was asked, "Are you a Zionist?" And I said, "No, I'm Jewish." And they just kind of meshed. Like I did, right? Like, well, you don't believe in the state of Israel? I do, but we got it. Like,
Yeah.
like that. Like they kind of just they reached that kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
inflection point, and we're done. Problem solved. So that I keep on going back to that, and that never really came up in my life again until after the 7th, right? And now I'm having this core memory come back. So we have Zionism, and now it has to be redefined. Judaism, you're a Jew, now you're a Zio. Zionism is now it's being redefined as colonialism, right? Like, once Israel's labeled the colonists, the apartheid, the white supremacists, or genocidal, and does evidence even matter at this point in time, or or has the moral conclusion already been built into the terminology? Like,
I mean, and it is, the terminology is all a trap. But the fact is, like with people, with individuals, Some of them are probably pretty much, as the kids call them, cooked. It's like you're probably not going to reach them. But it's kind of shocking, like I had TDS pretty bad. I had the Trump derangement pretty bad during the first term. And then I was shown conclusive. I just a friend of mine who liked Trump but wasn't weird about it, wasn't aggressive about it. He wasn't like MAGA sending me frogs all the time or whatever, but he was just chill about it. He was like, "Have you ever watched the whole Charlottesville video?" And I'm like, "No." I mean, I saw the clip, and he's like, "No, no, no, not the clip. Have you watched the whole clip? It's like 2.5 minutes." I was like, "No, the thing I saw is like 19 seconds." And he's like, "Will you watch the whole one if I send it to you?" He's like totally non-aggressive about this. I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'll watch it." And he sends it to me, and I watch it, and it's like Trump denounces white supremacy, like right on it, and that the claim is that he never did. And then he was like, "What'd you think?" And I'm like, "They lied." And he's like, "You want to watch another video?" I'm like, "Sure." And he sends me like a 5-minute supercut of Trump denouncing white supremacy like 57 times, all with it like dated before the Charlottesville thing in 2017. And I'm like, "Holy smokes, they lie all the time." And like that shook me out of my Trump derangement, right? That alone. So the same thing. And I've actually seen this happen a couple of times with young conservative guys who have drank a little of the anti-Israel Kool-Aid. I wouldn't call them like rabid zealots or groypers or
Mhm.
any of this, but they've drank a little bit of it. And we start having a conversation, and they'll bring up something like the U.S. Israel aid. It's always like the aid or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
the
And it's
aid.
like, okay, fine. I talked to this one guy. I was like, okay, fine. How does that money work? Right? Do you have any idea? He's like, well, we give them money. It's foreign aid. They do what they want with it. And I'm like, that is not how it works. He's like, how does it work? And I was like, well, I can tell you, and you might or might not believe me, or we can just pull out one of our phones, either one, I don't care, and ask Grok. Grok's pretty neutral. I get that it's not, conclusive, but you can ask Grok and see what it says. And so he pulls out his phone, he types into Grok, how is the US military aid? How does it work? How's it,
Mhm.
how is that money distributed or whatever? He asks some very neutral question. He puts go, and it's like, oh yeah, they all, except for like 500 million out of the 3.8 billion or whatever, it all has to be spent in U.S. industries, U.S. defense industries. Employs something like 20,000 Americans, brings total economic downflow from that roughly 3.3 billion, the economic downflow into the American economy, not in terms of intelligence sharing, value added, but just in terms of jobs and economic activities, about 20 billion into the US economy every year. And he starts reading it and he's like, I didn't know this. And I'm like, well, what do you think of that? And he's like, well, that's not what I thought. It's not what I thought. It's not what I was told. And, then all of a sudden he was like, I got to rethink some stuff. I don't know where
Mhm.
that ended up. I left him with it. It was at a conference where I didn't see him again, but he's like, I got to rethink some stuff. So these people aren't all lost. A lot of them have been lied to. And if you can show them in a non confrontational way that they've been misled or lied to or whatever,
Right.
some of them, like a lot of them are actually good people who've heard bad information. And I mean, I get in this argument sometimes with some of my Jewish friends about if they can still be considered a good person if they were stupid enough to become an anti-Semite. And it's like, you can get pulled into some dumb beliefs, man. I mean, there's a lot of people, some are Jews even, by the way, that are like, yeah, kids can totally consent to medical procedures to cut healthy organs off because they have a mental disorder. They don't phrase it that way. It's just, put on a rainbow flag and be an ally, or a pink and blue flag. But I mean, there's a lot of people who get fooled into supporting horrible things who are not actually bad people, but that they have got locked on either bad arguments or emotional arguments or identity arguments and just take them down the track. That doesn't actually, a lot of people can be rescued. I would guess about 10% can't, just
Yeah.
statistically speaking. And probably about half of them are actually like bad actors, but, and some of them are just broken. But outside of that, I think we can reach most people and kind of bring them back. And, it's like you almost want to give them the opportunity to, as to repent for what they've done, but not in like some weird, uncomfortable, serious way. Let them do that privately or however they feel like. But a lot of times it's like, yeah, you believe some stupid stuff. Everybody does. It's
Well,
some of
it's
it's kind of
also hard
funny.
because if you're in that road, like nobody wants to be proven wrong.
Right.
I've been, and especially if you've been. I'm going to go back. I remember again years ago there was a book that Oprah had really promoted, and it turns out that she was duped. That he said it was his true story, wasn't, and duped was the word, and I've loved the word ever since. Nobody wants to admit they were duped.
No.
And or tricked or just weren't smart enough to catch on. It's hard to say, oh my God, I was wrong. So I see a lot of the people that we see on the streets or spewing all this nonsense and garbage often are just kind of like, I just got to go with it. Like, I just got to keep on going with it, or else, I'm going to feel foolish.
Yeah.
So
Or they literally don't know better and they heard something salacious that, I mean, like, imagine that it was, me before I'd ever thought about Israel or whatever at all. And somebody told me, did you know that Israeli soldiers, the IDF goes in and shoots Palestinian children right in the face? I'm like, what? And they show me like a video that looks convincing. If that's all I know, like, I'm going to do stupid stuff. So, like, I've taken up obviously what I just said, if you listen to both of the examples I gave, that one was directed at me and one was from me, is that they actually approach the person with questions, trying to get them to explore the edges of what they know and then filling in more information when you discover those edges. But what I've been doing is just trying to put out the actual true stories and challenge people to go look them up. When I broadcast, like on my X or on my podcast or whatever, I'll just like, okay, here is how all that money works, or here is the actual, history of land ownership in what you probably would, not you personally, but a generic uninformed person would probably call Palestine, or if you want, Eretz Israel, or whatever you want to call the region. You could call it Syria, Palestina, for all I care. Whatever you want to call that area, the Near East. Here's the history of the land. And by the way, double check me. Go look it up. See if I'm right. See if I'm wrong. Here's the
yeah,
history of the so-called Palestinian people, and double check me. See if I've made any errors in my claims. Wait, what? They were created mostly by Yasser Arafat? Woo,
exactly. Like, and so I just cut you off. Double checking is huge. And I want to say, going back to looking at things critically, I was looking through some of your posts earlier again today. Just going over some more things. And there was a post you put out reminding us on the insanity. And you posted something about COVID, and it was all the
Is that the
actors in
people singing?
Imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
imagine.
And I didn't actually have the sound on. So I'm watching. It starts off with Gal Gadot and goes through all these people. I'm like, then I went up, I scrolled up, I had to read what you said. And I'm like, I'm going back, and I turned the volume up, and you were like, and we were so caught in the middle of it that it didn't seem as insane until you look back at it now. And I'm looking at this thinking, like, I remember watching that video when they first did it. I'm like, oh, how nice. Like,
Yeah,
what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it was, it was so beyond. And I'll tell you, when COVID hit, I'll be honest with you, we were in Canada. We were like, Canada was like California and New York had a baby, and that was what we came out with.
yeah.
Because
It
we
was
we had
bad.
the longest, stay at home, stay indoors, this, that. And I looked at it selfishly, where I had my oldest son was 16. I'm like, oh my God, he's gonna be going to school in 2 years. All the time I wasted years ago for work and this and that. I wish I had more time. So I'll be honest with you. I took a deep dive into the whole, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad for a little while, catch up with my kids, and that was it. Like, my youngest one, I'm like, here's $20, go ride your bike with some friends, just stay 8 feet apart, because
Yeah,
you might
eight
catch the
feet.
cooties. But it was like, we got him out, right? Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
even
yeah.
learning online, I would walk up to my kids' rooms. I'm like, hey, there was a big snow day. We had a massive blizzard, like an 80s blizzard. I'm like, it was great. 18 feet of snow was wonderful. And I said to my kids, I'm like, hey, snow day, tell your teacher you got to go. We're going outside. Right. So, but you look back, and if you don't look back and see how crazy everything was, you don't really realize that we could now question it. So I want to go left and right. We talked a bit about it before. Jewish community has been watching anti-Semitism explode. We've talked about that through progressive politics. We talked about, back in the 80s, that Russian defector, where he said, it's easy to go off the left because, they have no finish line. They actually have no, progressivism has no ending. We can keep on going there. So the progressive politics helps push that. Are we making a mistake when we treat them as two unrelated phenomenon, anti-Semitism and progressive politics, and the movement that is pushing it further and further? And we talked about before, it involving the right as well. Like, they're not unrelated.
Right. Yeah. Like, okay, so the left and the right actually are anti-Semitic in different ways. And the
Right.
way I bring this up, the short version of the different ways is that the right's actually anti-Semitic and the left is pro-Palestine. And we can get into the whole effect is the same, whatever that you want. But and my job is to try to get inside of the head of people who are thinking badly and take them at their word for what they believe. And I think it's helpful to understand the way they conceive of the world. And so the way that your average leftist conceives of the world is very infrequently that Jews are the problem. It is that the Palestinians are an oppressed minority And Israel, in conjunction with the United States, and to a degree Britain, although it's a little more complicated, are imperial powers that have massively oppressed and displaced and mistreated and killed and et cetera, and genocided or whatever these poor alleged Palestinian people. And you can't separate their leftism from that belief, because the reason they believe that is not just the leftism, but that the leftism is totally entwined since the middle of the 20th century with this Palestinianism, if we need a word for it, or Hamasianism, if you want to call it what it kind of more rightly is. It is actually, they are intertwined inextricably going back at least to the 1970s. So to think like a leftist requires you to think of the Orient, meaning the Near East, meaning the Middle East, in this set of terms. It requires you, if you're in a country like America or Canada, to interrogate the whiteness, the, in fact, illegitimate whiteness of Jews. There's an entire book about this. It wasn't a famous book or an important or popular book, but it was a book by Karen Brodkin in the late 90s. The title of the book shocked me. I used to trot it out as a hilarious example of critical race theory gone wrong. And the title of the book is How Jews Became White Folks and What That Means About Race in America. And the case that she makes is that the Jewish people in America literally threw other racial minorities under the bus during the civil rights movements in order to advance their own interests. They got themselves designated politically or sociopolitically as white or white enough. And then they went into all the industries and took control of generating whiteness. It's like literally the protocol story. And I'm
Yeah.
like, she doesn't even catch it. She doesn't even know that, though. She doesn't even realize what she's saying. That, the Jews are the small group that's the, mastermind, that's the setter of all the bourgeois values that controls the world. And so you have to interrogate Jewishness as whiteness if you're thinking as a leftist who's gotten into the race ideology. If you're thinking about it in terms of third worldism or post-colonialism or global politics, you have to think of it in terms of the Palestinian cause, Palestinianism, Hamasianism, or whatever. You have to. There's no other way to think about it.
Mhm.
And of course, the fact that almost all of this is in one way or another derivative to, Soviet lines of operation designed to fragment the West. It is either unknown or something they're proud of at some points. Also, I remind you, Angela Davis isn't the only one who went to Palestine and trained. And I don't know which side she was on. I don't know if she was on the Jordan side or the Gaza side. But she went to Palestine and trained how to be a better communist activist and a better street radical with these people. And so they're like, the tactics are totally intertwined. They're indistinguishable because they're
Mhm.
intertwined. They literally do and behave the same way. So the leftism, it's not extractable at this stage of Western Marxism. Again, it's not strictly speaking anti-Semitism. It is
Right.
anti-Zionism, and I do think that those, at least in their effect and in the political nature of it, that they're the same thing. But in their minds, they are not anti-Semitic in most cases. They
Mhm.
are pro-Palestine and anti-Israel and anti that oppression, and there is no separating from it. On the right, however, I feel very much like many of the pieces that the right has picked up are not only very artificial, but are very, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not irrelevant. They could be set down, right? It's
Right.
like, it's useful for what we're doing now, so we pick it up. But the problem is like anti-Semitism is like a mind virus that like takes root, and then you start thinking this way kind of forever. And right now, from what I understand, it is pretty typical in conservatives under the age probably of 25, maybe 30 in the US, that like most of their jokes, whether they mean them or realize it or whether they don't, and they're just kind of like going along and thinking it's funny because all their friends do it, but they don't mean it. And they think everybody's just joking, but some guys are actually serious. Are the Jew is the butt of the joke in some really nasty way, what the scholars of humor would call disparagement humor. And so they're making nasty Jew jokes. They're buying into anti-Semitic narratives. They're blaming Jews in Israel and Zionists and Zionism for most of the problems in their lives. And some of them are doing so knowingly, some of them less knowingly, what the consequences are. Most people are not very consequential thinkers, by the way. They're not really thinking day to day, like, oh, I'm making these jokes. What's going to be the outcome of this? For me, for people, for whatever. What am I excusing? I had a young lady I was talking with at a conference one time, and she and her little crowd. I sat down and had like drinks with them one night in their early 20s, and they're all making different edgy jokes, or all around race, around this or around that, and there was kind of like no limits. And it's fun. And then she texts me, she had my like thing in the app or whatever for the art conference. There's like an app. So she texts me and is like like a month and a half later. And she's like, James, you're right about the woke right. These people ruined racism. I'm like, what do you mean ruined racism? Like, she's like 22. I'm like, what the hell do you mean ruined racism? And she's like, it's supposed to be jokes. Racism is jokes. And some of these people just hate black people. I'm like, yeah, no shit.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
and the same thing's happening though with a lot of the young people now who are making Jews the expense of the jokes. And so it's different. I think it is extractable on the right wing side and it's not extractable on the left wing side because the logic, like the philosophies, like the philosophies that they use are just like means to an end. I don't think they really, in a lot of cases, even believe them that deeply. Right. But on the left, it is their mode of thinking. But the problem is for the right, there's a window that's closing. Like this will become their mode of thinking over time. And when you start thinking like a woke person, you eventually are just woke. And so it doesn't matter if it's a left wing or a right wing presentation, which the best way to say that is, are you a socially liberal socialist or a socially conservative socialist? Because basically you're ending, that's why the horseshoe's almost touching.
Right.
And the lightning bolt between the ends says Jews, every time it flashes.
At times I think they're almost overlapping, by the way. But
yeah, they're twisted around in a weird, like lovers not like
Yeah.
making out at this point. It's really gross and strange. But I think it's fundamentally different on the two sides, at least for now. But that's because this has been a mainstay of leftist thinking for 70 years in an increasing fashion. And this has been a 3-year dalliance on the right for your average mainstream conservatives. I know there's like, the Daily Stormer idiots and like the KKK guys and David Duke or whatever. I know they're out there. But for the vast majority of people where this has suddenly erupted, this has been a couple of year dalliance. A lot of people I would be willing to bet are like that young lady I was talking to who thinks it's supposed to be just funny. It's just jokes. We're just joking, right? Like Jews tell Jew jokes, so we can tell Jew jokes.
Well, which is funny because my kids after the 7th said to me, and they were all older now, they're like, now we understand why you used to get mad at us when we would tell Jew jokes. And I'm like, and what would I tell you the reason was? They said, because if we tell Jew jokes, that means we're allowing other people to perpetuate the stereotype and blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah. So,
I mean, this generation though, and this is partly because all the woke nonsense they grew up under and are reacting to. And I don't know that it's harmless, but it's kind of at least mostly benign and it's actually venting a steam. It's being like, it's criticizing woke more than it is anything for a lot of them. Like, I don't know if you've spent time with, I guess you have kids, but like, I don't know if you have much time. Like, there's like, they got their friend group at school and like one of them's Chinese and they literally call them soy sauce or like they're all like this. Like the Mexican guy, they literally call him like taquito, and then like taquito and soy sauce were having like they literally are just. And I'm like, I grew up in the '90s and we didn't go anywhere near. So like, whoa, like
Yeah. Well, by the way, we solved racism in the '90s. That was we fixed it, didn't we?
Yeah, it was basically called a dance party, is what you did. You
cool.
got a racial problem. Shut up, put on some music, let's go.
That was an episode of Beverly. It was a Beverly Hills.
Yeah, something like that.
I do believe that was an episode. I just popped up my TV a while ago. It's great. So I want to go over a few more things. So in Toronto, if you've been following, and we're going to add in Canada wasn't on my list, and I think one day we're going to have to come back and really go deep into Canada because you brought up one thing that I want to talk about. We're going to mention for 9 seconds right now is MAID. I'm sure you're aware of MAID in Canada. We're going to come back
kicked
to
off of Facebook because of MAID for life. I have a new one now, but we'll see how that lasts. But yeah, they originally kicked me off permanently for MAID, a MAID joke.
Wow. Have you ever connected with Kelsey Sharon up in Canada?
Yeah, I know her.
Yeah. So I was into learning about it. I'm like, whoa, oh my God. It blew me away. And now I'm like, yeah, it's frustrating. So we'll get there in a second. Recently, so in Canada, in a museum, this goes back to the education and museums and the indoctrination and stuff. There's a museum called the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. Now, if you've been following this at all, they have an exhibit called the Nakba exhibit.
Yeah, I did see something about this.
So last week, myself and Corey went to go see this exhibit because we hear a lot of stuff. People talk about this. I'm a person I've got to go see it with my own eyes. I got to hear.
You probably have to touch it.
Right. Like it was so insane where it was, I've heard, you go from the Holocaust exhibit right over next to it, which it's on the different floors, but it's the floor above and below. But when you look at the knowledge they have, according to this exhibit, everything started in 1948. That was it. And the Nakba, had nothing to do with the phrase given from a book that was written that the Nakba was 5 armies failing to destroy the Jews, and they've retold the story. And what happens when museums, schools, cultural institutions stop teaching competing historical claims and begin teaching one group primarily through victimhood and another through oppression, which is exactly what that is. I mean, they got all the keywords, and the craziest part is all the verbiage combined and it's only 25 feet long, this exhibit. All the wording between the start and the end is under 600 words.
Wow.
And that's not a lot.
That's
not
very
like,
little. As somebody who
that's,
writes 600-word op-eds, sometimes it's tough.
yeah. And they hit all the keywords of oppression and colonialism,
Yeah.
and it was all one emotion-filled exhibit. So
Yeah. So I have some words. You asked me some words. Okay. So what is it called when you teach only one view? That's called indoctrination, especially when that view, like you could teach, this is tricky because when you actually teach the true thing, right, then you're teaching the true thing. But the difference is between the true thing and the not, and like an indoctrination where you're teaching or anti-indoctrination, where you're teaching multiple perspectives on a contentious issue, is that the true thing is something that any independent observer that went and observed the facts for themselves would conclude. If they find two sets of competing facts and you're only teaching one of them, you're doing indoctrination. When you start to add in the emotional manipulation, you're doing something deeper. When you start bringing in, like you said, it's an emotional roller coaster. The right word for this, I'm going to be very blunt, is trauma bonding. What you are doing is you are intentionally traumatizing. You are using a technique that's called generative themes that comes from a Marxist educator from Brazil called Paulo Freire to create the emotional response. He said himself in his own footnote about the technique that he derived it from Mao Zedong's mass line campaign in China in the Cultural Revolution. He says that explicitly in the 10th footnote of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. You can look it up yourself. And so what they're doing is creating a traumatic experience so that the rest of the information will structure how you interpret the experience to bring you out to a predetermined conclusion. That is not indoctrination. That is called thought reform or ideological remolding. Those are the two terms that were used to translate the original Chinese that the Maoists used for what Mao literally called it. If you actually translate the characters literally, it means ideological remolding, to remold somebody's ideological beliefs. So you shock them with the emotion or with the pressure of a social circumstance, and then you spend the rest of the time with the information structuring the way that they're going to interpret it on the way out. So that is manipulation and abuse, is actually what that is, in order to create a desired outcome ideologically. So that's really bad. It's way beyond indoctrination, way, way
right.
beyond. Oh, and by the
So
way,
yeah.
anybody watching, I know this is a Jewish channel, but who hates me, so you're watching this and you don't already know this, why don't you go look up the 5 armies that attacked in 1947-48, but especially in 48? Why don't you go look them up and find the Palestinian army? See if you can find it. See if that's one of the 5 countries.
We're gonna get a better chance of finding the Easter Bunny at this point in time on that one. So here's a question: how do you reverse institutional capture? Like, once that ideology has become institutionally common sense, and here's the challenge: this museum has got a memorandum of understanding across the entire country with every single minister of education and all the school boards that follow underneath it, that they use this for curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
how
okay.
can we reverse institutional capture?
So I'm going to quibble with the term. They don't become common sense. They become what Marcuse, the father of the New Left, called common sensibility. And it's not the same thing, because common sense is that which anybody can perceive with their own senses and with their own sense making apparatuses to arrive at the same conclusions. It's actually a deep philosophy. It's not like, oh, stuff everybody knows. Okay, so there's a common sensibility. How do you deal with this when it becomes institutional, that there's a single point of view, single common sensibility that's being pushed onto people, like you said, in this very institutional way? The bad answer that nobody wants to hear, especially in Canada where things are very bad right now. They're bad in the US too, but they're the least bad in the US. But the answer is actually that personnel is policy. You actually have to start a campaign that ultimately discredits what's going on a sufficient scale to where the people that are involved start getting replaced with people who will steward the situation more responsibly. And this is in every situation a very, very difficult process. Following Soviet Union, I don't think it really worked very well. And in fact, I think it was sort of a farce. They had perestroika, right? So you effectively are going to have something like perestroika, which I think means restructuring. I don't speak Russian, but you're going to ultimately have to deal with the fact that it is ultimately personnel that's policy. And Canada's in a bad place as compared to the United States for this because our constitution is so much stronger than your charter. I know I see the propaganda sometimes. Apparently, your charter is the pinnacle document of humanity or something right
It's
now, but
not even worth the paper it's written on.
no, it's not very good. And the American Constitution, for example, protects my right as an American to call bullshit on that and to make the case, whereas the Canadian Charter is not going to actually protect you in that way. Especially like I've been seeing, like, the school, the what are they, the whatever schools that allegedly, all the dead Native Americans are under the
The
ground.
residential schools.
You are not allowed to. You can be like in trouble bigly for
They
questioning
try they
the
tried
claim.
to make it so that you can go to prison for 10 years
Yeah.
if
So,
you
like,
denied it.
this is one of these situations where the insanity of the regime that's in control right now, which you guys call the liberal party, the insanity of the regime that's in control actually, like, that thing has to hit the point of public no confidence to the degree where a restructuring is actually necessary, almost from ground up. I don't know for sure. I think, of course, the Alberta separatist movement is one of the things that's happening in Canada that has the highest, I think, probability of being able to send a shock big enough to the system that might shake things up. But I'm very concerned about Canada. I mean, I've been to Canada several times in the last few years, I should say. 23, maybe, certainly 4, yeah, 23, 24, 25, and 26. I've spoken in Canada all these different years. And when I went in 23, when I went in 24, when I went in 25, it was fine. It's Canadian. It was like, don't step
Yeah.
in the bike lane, kind of. But it
Yeah,
was,
exactly.
there's a little bit of this, like, Canadian, like it's woke, right? It's just freaking woke. And that's a little bit irritating or whatever. But okay, when I came up this year and I was in Toronto specifically, it was like, this place is dark. Like, almost from the minute I got out of the airport, I'm like, I've got to get out of this country. Like, don't stay here. Don't stay here. And I've had this conversation with like 4 or 5 other Americans who've had to travel through Canada in the last maybe like 3 to 4 months. And they're like, I had to do 2 days in Vancouver. And I'm like, I just had this impending feeling of I've got to get out of this country. And that's new. I'm talking to Americans who've lived in Canada for a decade or so while I'm in Toronto. And they're like, yeah, I work as a server at a restaurant. When I'm like working, a lot of times now, the table will be like, I need to talk to your manager. I won't have an American serve me. Like, there's like weird
Yeah,
stuff
it's so
going on.
bad.
Like, elbows
Weird.
up has gotten really weird. And like, there's this whole, like, not just the anti-American thing, which is its own disease. There's this other attitude that's just like, therefore everything else that we're doing under this liberal party agenda is necessarily good. And like, a lot of Canadians, it's like I see kind of like 3 kinds. There's like the ones that are like alarmed and doing something and God bless them. And then there's the kind that like just they kind of consciously just don't want to know. And then there are the ones that are like, elbows up, let's go. And it's really concerning. Like, I've never felt that kind of, like, even when I used to go to China, but I think I was just naive to what I was dealing with. I never felt that urgent feeling to get, like, I can't stay in this country. And then when I went to London a month ago, and I did not have that impression in the UK. And not that the UK is doing great. They have speech codes. People get arrested for stuff. Obviously, they're turning a blind eye to a lot of really bad stuff, really, really bad stuff. And it's been a huge problem. So it's not a country that's like high on the scale of country health. But I didn't have this impending sense of I've got to get out of here that I did when I
Yeah.
was in Canada. And I had a wonderful
We
time in Canada. Like, everything was fine. It was just this like feeling in the air that it wasn't good to be there.
It went from a TDS symptom, like, we're really, I'd say, the last year, and you had a conservative government that was gonna really. I don't think that if Justin Trudeau had run against Pierre Poilievre, the Liberal government wouldn't have had enough seats to even be considered a party.
Right.
They would have been eradicated. And then in comes Mark Carney with this elbows up. He didn't run against a Canadian conservative. He ran against Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was the most amazing. And they're still doing it. And,
Yeah, I'm watching. I've got tons of contacts. I stay pretty, I mean, for an American that's not on the border, I'm fairly in tune with some Canadian stuff. I'm not like adept. I'm not claiming more than I have, but like, I've seen, like, it's a disaster. It's
well,
really like shocking.
people get so wound up, and I'm a different breed of person. I like to push the envelope. So when Donald Trump came out saying, like, my organization is unapologetically Jewish. I'm going to say the things nobody wants to hear sometimes. So when Donald Trump came up with 50, there you go, came with 51st state, I had this hat made, which people are like, do you actually wear this in public?
That's hilarious.
Like that was for me to kind of, my kids all actually have that keep. It's amazing. But so it's, yeah, we're in a whole place. I think we should do another show of just of what's happening in Canada, because I don't think people really realize it. Before you go, I want to ask you this, because I think it's an important thing that we've been talking about. And I think this plays part of in what is happening in Canada, especially. So you spent an enormous amount of time, obviously, studying Marxism, critical theory. One thing that we haven't really touched base yet on, but it is really the big elephant in the room, is Islamism.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that fit? This is a 17-hour conversation,
That is a
right?
17-hour conversation.
Right.
So I've been doing a series of podcasts about this, and I have one of the two books handy. Actually, if I stretch, I have both of them. So I have been reading from this book. I know it's backwards. It's called
Yeah.
Milestones. This book
Yeah.
is Said Qutb. And Qutb is, for the people who don't know, he basically was like the intellectual, like, rejuvenator, I suppose, is a good way to put it, of the Muslim Brotherhood. He's like kind of the arch Salafist, if you will. He's the one that's, comes back. He was studied as a Leninist, goes to America, somewhere in Colorado, Greeley or something outside of Fort Collins, for a year, decides American society is decadent and sinful and awful and jahili. It goes back to Egypt and ends up writing all these really radical essays for the Muslim Brotherhood. They collect some of them plus some extra writing, puts out this book Milestones in 64. He's so radical. Nasser's trying to clean up at the time. He's trying to clean up the Muslim Brotherhood. He arrests Qutb, actually has him hanged in 66. So he's out. And then, of course, the Six-Day War comes along in 67. Egypt gets humiliated in Six-Day War by Israel. And Saudi Arabia actually comes along to bail out Egypt because they're scared of Nasser's pan-Arabism. So, because the kingdom wants to stay a kingdom, it doesn't want a pan-Arab nationalist situation that it's going to lose its kingdom and all of its oil money to. And so they basically want to put Nasser under control. And one of the things that they do is we'll give you money, but you got to let all the Muslim Brotherhood guys out of prison. Now they can't let Qutb out of prison because he's dead, but that's kind of how the Muslim Brotherhood kind of got back on its feet. And then this book is the book that they turn to, and it's basically, and it's not basically, it's literally, if you aren't a full-blown jihadi Salafist who looks back to the Prophet and his immediate contemporaries as the only model of Islam as we interpret it, as the Muslim Brotherhood interprets it in its kind of most radical, then you're not even a Muslim. So it's forget Jew, forget Christian, forget atheist, forget Orthodox, forget if you are Saudi, you're not a Muslim. You're not doing it right. These guys are hardcore, and they created problems, in the Middle East. And those, of course, the mullahs in Iran, being Shia, would never admit that they ripped off the program, but they ripped off the program, made their own version, they retrofitted it, and that's kind of the Khomeini brand of 12er Shia. So almost all of the radical Islam that people deal with in the world today is downstream from this kind of radical Salafist thinking and put in this book. So I've been reading through this book here and there, explaining to people what it says so that people can know, this is from what I understand, somebody 10 people have told me this, and I don't have the resources to even figure out if this is true, but that this stuff is a much bigger problem in the West than it is in the Middle East, because
much bigger. I've heard the same thing.
So they come to the West and they go full blown this as an identity program. And then there's all these radical imams that, okay, you're a Muslim, you came to Canada, you don't know what to do, you don't know where your community is, so you go to a mosque. And then you've got these radical imams that are let's tell you how it works. By the way, we got money.
We have many of them here, by the way.
And so I've been trying to present that. I've been recommending this book by Danny Barmawi, Islam, Israel, and the West. It's a really good beginner's introduction to basically the whole story of why that conflict is the way that it is, especially if you want to understand some stuff about the manufactured nature of the Palestinian cause. I really recommend it. Danny's doing really good work at his, what is it called? The Ideological Defense Institute, IDI. It's funny that I had to remember what it's called. I'm on the board of advisors, and I was like, what's it called? So he's doing really great work, though. I get these
podcasts, so
I get these newsletters almost every day that he and other people are writing, and They're really helping me understand the issue better. And so I really encourage people to check that out. It's very helpful. So I've been trying to kind of just, it's like I have too damn much to do. I can't cover all these different ideologies. But at the same time, there's a intersection in a sense for me, which is that a lot of this radical Salafism and a lot of the so-called Palestinianism is directly in the, Soviet channel. It's like the communists helped create it. The communists helped spread it. The communists came up with a lot of their tactics. Of course, they developed many of them on their own too. And then, like I said, Koop was a freaking Leninist. There's a strong argument to be made that I find persuasive, having read both of them again, more like kind of back to back. The milestones in Lenin's 1902 book, What Is to Be Done, are the same book for two different radical religions, one for Islam, for Salafist Islam specifically, and then one for communism. And so this is the book that Lenin used in 1902 to organize the activity of the Bolshevik Party. It calls for a radical vanguard that's the most, strongly communist. It's going to lead everything. And this is the same thing that Koop was calling for in Milestone. So I'm just trying to do a little bit of education. Of course, I'm reading Orientalism to people. It's shot through with this. We've been talking about these issues that it's just been, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's post-colonial theory, third worldist, liberationist thinking. I mean, for goodness sakes, the Popular Front for the L word, Liberation of Palestine, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, PLA, that L word keeps coming up. And, there's a reason. It's communist. And so I have a lot of like intersection ground to be able to like explain the relevance to the kind of Western leftist movement in that regard. I actually know a lot less about why the kind of ideological or theoretical reasons why the radical right is the way that it is. I know that they're heavily Duginist, and Dugin took up completely with Iran, and plus Russian interests in the area all converge on the U.S.-Israel relationship is the disaster for basically what I call now new axis: Russia, Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, China. As Pakistan's like the light member of the crew, but
Yeah,
new
they're there.
axis is what I refer to that as. And this is a serious thing. So I know that they're downstream from Duginism, and Duginism is pro-Shia Islam explicitly. It's also pro-Iran and has been for at least since the 90s, right after the fall of Soviet Union. And during the Soviet Union, Soviet Union was in bed with Iran too. So there's a lot for me to be able to talk about in terms of the history and some of the ideology. I know Dugin's stuff pretty well. I was reading Dugin and Hitler back to back today, like chapter of Hitler, chapter of
Light,
Dugin.
light reading for you this afternoon.
Man, I tell you what, I kind of hit the point. I texted a friend of mine. I was like, I need to tap out. Like, I kind of want to delete my brain after going back and forth between these two books. And it's not because they're like, actually, you think they're like super awful. The parts I'm reading are not like evil. It's just like bad, stupid, stultifying arguments. And it's like, how much of this stupidity can I read?
Until you become stupider. It's funny, before we end this up, we're talking about the wording and liberalism, going back to Canada, so many of the liberal government keep on referring to themselves as our new government. And I pointed out to people, Google new government and look at what countries pop up who use the phrase our new government.
Yeah. By the way, I have the Chinese Constitution from 1949.
Our new government is mentioned.
That Mao put out. It's called the Common Program of the Chinese People. So Article 1, let me see if that's where it is. The People's Republic of China is a new democratic or people's democratic state. And so the new democratic state or new democratic government is mentioned. Like, this conference universally agrees that the new democracy or people's democracy shall be the political foundation for the national construction of the People's Republic of China. So that was the constitution that Mao Zedong adopted when he took over China by force in 1949. It only lasted till 1954. It turns out that these constitutions are not very good, and there's lots of internal roiling revolution. And every time one of those happens, a few million people have to get murdered to go to the next stage. But
It's that term new.
that's that term. You should
The
be.
new Russia, the new North Korea, the new Iran, that new. I started hearing that. It gave me chills, and the hair on my neck started to stand. And then you look at there's the new government, and then going back to what we talked about the Charter of Rights and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution in the United States. And I had a conversation with friends. We were talking about it, and my friend said, here's where they differ. The United States, Americans fought for their country and for their constitution. There was blood spilt to have that thing written.
Mm-hmm.
We negotiated ours 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ours was a transaction. It was a poorly negotiated document, and you guys fought for it. And there's a big difference. And I think until there's actually fighting for something, people don't really hold it real, and we don't really believe in what it is because it's so wishy-washy, because you had, like, the lawyers wrote it.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And I keep on pointing people, to keep, whenever I talk to people about it, I'm like, go watch, the miniseries John Adams, just to get an idea of what they went through. And that's even like the fairy tale version of it.
Yeah. I actually just
So,
bought a bunch of books on the American Revolution that I'm actually, once I set down Dugan and Hitler, I can get to and enjoy. And I'm actually very much looking forward to reading them. I think it'll be a big renewal of my spirit to read this stuff.
well, that's it. And listen, I hope so. And honestly, James, thank you so much. I hope we can do this again, because there's so much ground to cover, and I'm learning more and writing stuff down. I'm going to put some links in as well, so people can find where you are if they're not already following you, and get this information down, because I think it's a great starting point. And the more we can talk it over, more we can. I, again, love to do it more often with you, and just want to thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and sharing your knowledge and sharing everything you've gone through.
Yeah. Well,
Appreciate it.
absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome. Stick around, everybody. James, talk to you in 1 second. Again, this is Matt Taub, the Unapologetically Jewish podcast. Incredible guest, James Lindsay. Make sure you're following him. If you're not, you're going to click on all the links down below to find out where he is. Again, thanks a lot, James, and I will see you all later.